So I think, yeah, we are active. Alright, so, basically, and I guess I'm also going to do my best to not be like, as you guys can see on the screen here, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, so, alright, we'll start in 3, okay? Alright, in 3, 2, 1. And we are back at the 9th corner of the Octagon with Garrett and Lincoln. What's going on, guys? So this week, as you guys are probably gonna understand, this will be a shorter episode than we're typically used to, and this is mostly because of the fact that we're still in quarantine and there's still not a lot going on right now in terms of any actual progress being made in the MMA world. You guys will know what we mean once we get further into this discussion, but basically what has been going on this past week in terms of the most recent developments in terms in relation to the Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson fight at UFC 249. As I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard by now, that Khabib Nurmagomedov is currently quarantined in Russia, and due to their own laws that have been put into place to fight against the coronavirus, spread of COVID-19, the borders have been shut down, and the way the story goes, according to Nurmagomedov himself, his camp got shut down, more or less, aka had to close their doors to do what they had to do in order to fight against the spread of the coronavirus. And Khabib, wanting to continue his training until the fight were to take place on April 18th, he went back to Russia, he went back to Dagestan to continue his training, but once he pretty much landed, it became evident that he would not be able to leave Russia again. Now, that being said, people have also come out this past week and said that the Russia government is working, they basically made it to where you can apply for a business expedition outside of the borders of their country, and if you have business outside there, you need to work and stuff, they will let you leave. But as of right now, it seems like Khabib is exclusively tied to Russian soil. So, more or less.
There's not a lot of luck with it, is there?
No, but I think I want to say we jumped the gun a little bit when the news first hit that Khabib was trapped in Russia, because then it came out not too long after the fact that he would potentially be able to leave. Like I was talking to you on Wednesday, I think, and we said something like that, like that was the case.
Like, it's still kind of possible, but we don't know for sure.
Yes, and according to Khabib, the biggest problem here is that the UFC just has not sent him the location.
The location.
Exactly. They just, for whatever reason, it seems like the UFC is still struggling to find a location, to find a venue. And we'll get into possible venues here in the next little bit, but it really seems like due to lack of communication on the UFC's part, Khabib is basically stuck in limbo.
Which, I just have to say, this match is cursed. Not meant to happen.
Okay, so you're one of those people that has basically just accepted that it will never happen.
At this point, it just seems like it.
Okay.
Like, I don't know for a complete fact that it's definitely never gonna happen. I'm talking, like, there's some people, like, I even think it's possible that this fight never happens, even after this quarantine or lockdown or shelter in place or anything. I think this match will just always be cursed. Like, every time there's gonna be a new pandemic, an asteroid coming to the Earth, like, every time you think this is gonna happen, go down. They're just gonna give you the middle finger with reality, you know.
I mean, I'm not quite there yet. I think I'm
not quite there yet either, but it just seems like it.
It seems like you have no choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think the whole event is even gonna happen. Maybe.
That's something we are going to talk about a little bit later. But basically, I'm one of those people that is kind of reluctant to just be patient.
I'm trying to be patient.
And I know that they both...
It's just like everything else is canceled.
Yeah.
So just trying to cling on to this one little thing, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously don't want to get my hopes up, like you said, that the event is even going to happen at all.
I just don't want to get my hopes up.
Yeah, so really I'm not going to let myself get to the point where I'm so excited that I'm going to be angry that it isn't happening for sure. Like, I'm not going to say that it's not happening until the UFC comes right out and says it's not happening April 18th. But the really discouraging thing about this whole situation is that we're a little over 2 weeks out now, and we still don't know where the location is. So it's like you can't blame. A lot of people are out here trying to blame Khabib, and especially people like Tony Ferguson, who I can understand is understandably frustrated that it seems like yet again he's going to be denied his title shot. But we have to understand here that it's not Khabib's fault. You know, he's had multiple interviews in the past few days going on record about, you know, and really responding to the people that are saying these things about him, that it's not his fault. You know, he can't go and fight at UFC 249 if he doesn't know where it is.
Which is a very fair argument.
Exactly, and especially with the strict travel laws that are being put into place right now, he needs to know where it is as soon as possible so he can make the arrangements, he can sign whatever paperwork he needs to file out, and then he can get to wherever it is that he needs to go. I think we're all a little distracted here, and we're all a little, you know, frustrated that it's probably not happening again. But we also have to understand there's a world pandemic going on right now.
Yeah, which is why I was kind of confused why they said that they're still going through with this, even if it's getting closer and closer. Exactly.
And the real issue here is that the real issue I find here is that people are just trying to remove Khabib from the picture altogether.
Which is strange.
It is.
But it's also, at this point, it's just like too much effort, too much wiggling around to try to get him anymore, try to get somebody closer.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Or even have a different fight, like how they're trying to push Masvidal versus Usman.
Right. Which, don't get me wrong, I'm hyped for, but like I've mentioned, we're a little over 2 weeks out. It really seems difficult to schedule new fights, you know, schedule new matchups that the fighters weren't initially prepared for. I mean, it's true that if you're a true professional, I guess you're never really out of shape.
Right.
But there's a reason they give you.
Everybody always works out a little bit when you're at that stage.
Exactly, but we gotta be honest here when we say that, you know, some of the guys, you know, not discrediting Usman or Masvidal, but they're probably just not ready for something like that. They wouldn't be at the full extension of where they would be if they were given the time that they needed.
Exactly. It's much different at a full training camp than it would be if you're just chilling.
Exactly.
Inside, you not being able to go to the gym using either your home gym or just whatever you have around your house or in your yard.
I mean, don't get me wrong, you know, I guess this is a good time to transition to the next thing we were going to talk about, which was if Khabib really can't attend, assuming UFC 249 does take place on April 18th, and assuming Khabib really can't attend the venue, then it comes the issue of, well then, does? Who does fight Ferguson, assuming Ferguson can even attend? And then there was the whole talk, and this is why I said that it really seems like a lot of people are just trying to remove Khabib from the equation, because as soon as news hit that Khabib was going to be trapped in Russia because of quarantine, everybody started, hitting.
Replace it. This will have to happen.
Exactly. Everybody immediately said, okay, Justin Gaethje. Let's get Justin Gaethje out there and fight Ferguson.
Which I also wanted that fight to happen anyways after Khabib Ferguson, so if it's before, maybe.
Right. Don't get me wrong. That's a great fight. I'd like to see that. And then you have McGregor versus Ferguson. Again, I'd love to see that fight too. Ferguson is really calling for Khabib to have his belt stripped of him, which I think is a little ridiculous, and really shows Ferguson's, animosity towards the situation and his real lack of under full comprehension of what's really going on. It is more of a premature attempt to just get him the title he feels he so deserves. But if I gotta be honest here, I think that it would be, in my opinion, some people are on the fence, but in my opinion, I don't think, if Khabib can't fight the 18th, I don't think Ferguson should be fighting the 18th.
Right.
I think if we really want Tony versus Khabib to happen, we don't want to put Ferguson in a position where he will be, if he goes up against somebody like Justin Gaethje, that's not an easy fight.
It's not.
That's going to be...
It's going to be bloodier than the timing. Anthony Pettis and Tony Ferguson's father.
Exactly. That's a mean fight, and considering that if Khabib can't attend, in April, he's been saying, I can easily fight in August. Give me the time that he needs to recover from fasting during Ramadan. Give him time to get back into shape, do the training for 2 months, and then fight in August. Willing, if that would be something that's possible, even. And Ferguson, if you want to talk about curses, I really think that would just be adding to a litany of mistakes leading into this if we were to schedule Tony Ferguson to fight somebody else. Because on one hand, I almost think it's an insult to Tony Ferguson.
You don't.
I think it's an insult. I think it's an insult to Tony Ferguson, because that just means that he has to go through another opponent to prove that he's ready to challenge the champion. And I think he's already done everything he needs to do to prove that. And I think making him fight someone like Justin Gaethje or Conor McGregor is really just a big slap in the face, because what if he loses?
Right.
If he loses against Conor McGregor...
What if they make it for an interim belt?
If they make it for interim, I don't know. It still seems ridiculous to me, because Tony has already won the interim championship, before.
How crazy would it be if he was the two-time interim champion and never the undisputed?
It would suck, dude. It would really suck. That's why I think we have to preserve, and we have to just be patient, even if it means putting it off. I think true fans are more accepting of putting off the dream fight as opposed to just wanting to see.
I wouldn't be terribly mad if they canceled the entire thing altogether, and then they just said it's going to happen in August or whatever, and maybe they have one fight that they have that's somebody else that's not Tony or Khabib or Gaethje or anything, like if they have Kamaru versus Jorge Masvidal instead,
right,
or they just don't do anything, I would be fine with it, because at this point it's just a shitstorm.
Exactly. It's really just a matter of, do you want the Ferguson Nurmagomedov fight or not? Because I really feel like, because say we give Ferguson Gaethje and he fights the 18th, and then he has to recover for months, Well, I mean, who's to say that Ferguson doesn't, break his elbow or tear an ACL or do something crazy that's going to require surgery and months on months of physical therapy recovery, and he's out for a year or so, and then it's just put off even more when we could have just waited, put off seeing Ferguson fight again, and then just have him fight later in the summer, which I think is the appropriate thing to do. I think if Dana White or anybody else wants to really push a main event, then they need to be pushing Justin Gaethje versus Conor McGregor. It's the fight we talked about before we officially made this show. We had talked about it in a previous podcast. We talked about how it was just, it was meant to be. If McGregor beat Cowboy, who was one of the first people we said would be a great matchup after the fact?
It's for Justin Gaethje, dude, because they both just beat Cowboy.
Exactly. So, in my mind, it makes the most sense to pit those two up against each other, because then that just rounds out who belongs in third place.
Exactly. And that DM that Justin Gaethje sent Conor forever ago, months and months ago now, where he's like, fight me in Ireland. I need that chaos in my life. How was that not decided then and there, just from that comment?
Exactly. So it's a little ridiculous. And honestly, being realistic, if they did schedule Gaethje versus McGregor, it's likely not going to take place on the 18th. It really just doesn't seem likely that they would schedule new fights. It makes more sense that they would have Tony Ferguson fight Conor or Justin. It's happened before where they've had people with only like 10 days notice go into a fight. But I just don't think it's smart. I mean, obviously it's still going to make money, but I feel like it's not smart for what we should be doing in order to ensure who becomes the new champion. So that's just what I really think about that there. I guess we can kind of move into the next, pretty much the last thing I felt the need to really discuss here was the possible locations for where it is exactly that UFC 249 is even going to take place, because like we've already mentioned now, we don't know. We still have no inkling. We have a few ideas that I'm about to run through here, the top 5 ideas for where it is that the UFC is going to try and have this event, this shit show, but again, this is all still speculation at this point. So the first possible location is Florida. I'm sure you've heard this. We talked about this briefly last week when it was still just a dot on the radar. But now it's seeming to be a likely spot that they're not. It appears that the UFC has been in talks to move UFC 249 to Florida, potentially in Orlando, Tampa, or Jacksonville. And despite the pandemic, Florida has actually hosted a fight card quite recently. On March 21st, Combat Night MMA promoted an event in the emptied-out Morocco Shrine Center in Jacksonville. So that could be the catalyst for why it is. People have been talking about having the fight in Florida, and I'm sure the UFC has been actually in discussions and having serious meetings with the governor to try and host the fight there. It wouldn't be a bad idea. I just think that if that's where we're going to have it, we need to come out and hurry up and say that's where it's going to be.
Right. Yeah, and there's so much speculation, and I've heard so many different things and read so many different articles, and at this point I'm just like, y'all are just making this up.
Exactly, because that's all they can do. There's no...
I know, this isn't even like you've heard it from somebody, this is just you are just saying stuff.
Yeah.
Because like most of the stuff that we've talked about, we've read somewhere else, and we assume they heard it from somebody else, but at this point it just seems like everybody's just guessing.
Exactly, like that's all we can do at this point, because Dana White just can't give us anything concrete. And when all this first started, it was initially thought because he was trying to build the suspense for it, and that he was just trying to build up the hype for the card. But now, with all the stuff that's going on with Khabib and the fact that he's trapped in Russia and can't do what he needs to do to arraign to get himself out of Russia, to get wherever he needs to go to fight for the card, then now it just starts to seem like the UFC genuinely has no idea where they're going to do this.
Yeah, it's just all in Dana White's backyard.
Exactly. And speaking of Dana White's backyard, one of the second places that they were talking about was trying to get back into Nevada and trying to get back into the Apex Center, and talk with the governor and talk with the athletic commission to temporarily lift the ban on all combat sports. But again, that doesn't seem
That's a lot to try to get done in the amount of time they have.
Yeah, exactly. It says here, the commission's planned March 25th meeting, which likely would have determined whether UFC 249 could occur in Nevada, was postponed because of the threat of the pandemic. So it basically, just in that sentence alone, says to us that
they have no idea what they're doing.
Exactly. Like, it's so bad in Nevada right now that the UFC can't even get a chance to talk to the commission, to have meetings with the commission, to even discuss whether or not it can happen. So it's like they can't even get their foot in the door to make it possibly happen. It's pretty crazy, and again shows how unlikely it is that we'll be having the fight in the United States at all. And then the third option. This was a big talking point that initially made sense. This was suggested by Khabib's father to have the fight in the United Arab Emirates, and was initially suggested to have the fight in Dubai or Abu Dhabi. And Dana White has gone on record to say that was a possibility. There was a lot of thought put into that, I shall say. But as we've been able to know with Khabib, in his case, the Emirates has, especially in this past week, have really come down hard with new restrictions. So now it seems like that, what was once the greatest possibility, the greatest option that we could have had, now seems like yet another fleeting hope, a fleeting dream.
Getting crazy.
Yeah.
At this point, I just think you should cancel and reschedule, like you did with the other 3 events.
Well, we'll get to that. That's up next. Well, that's on deck. But the last thing was, this was funny that they included this, but again, this next one is just apparent. This is just showcases the desperation and the lack of options that we have going into this. This was suggested by Joe Rogan on the Joe Rogan Experience, suggesting that UFC 249 could occur on a naval vessel in international waters.
Yeah, we talked about this.
Yeah, we talked about this last week, but I bring it up again just because it really shows how desperate, the idea, how desperate we are to have it, and how it really seems like with the lack of options and the amount of government restrictions across the globe, having the fight take place in international waters genuinely at this point seems like a viable option. But
seems like it's the only option.
Exactly. I mean, the UFC is they're sponsored by the U.S. Army and the Navy and stuff like that, the Marines. I'm not saying that it would be easy. I think it would actually be really difficult to coordinate and put together. But with a little over 2 weeks, about 15 days, it's Dana White, and I have faith that if he really put his mind to that specific option, he could get it done. But again, with how strict not just governments, but really everybody has been with trying to prevent the spread of COVID-19, it's yet another option that really just seems too good to actually be true. And that more or less brings us to the fifth option, which is basically what we've been preparing ourselves for this entire time, talking about and leading up to, is that the fight could very well, UFC 249 could very well take place nowhere and not happen at all. And it's something that we, as MMA fans, as crazy as we can be about the sport, it's something that we honestly have to just accept as a possibility that could actually take place, that could actually happen.
Because, what if John McCarthy gets it while he's wrestling, and then he dies, or something like that happens, and we're gonna really wish that we just postponed it or something, or just accidents, or not or like you were saying, where Tony Ferguson, if they do keep having it, and he gets more injured fighting Justin Gaethje, there's just so much negativity that could come from trying to do this one positive thing while all this is going on.
Exactly.
Has such bad adverse effects.
Exactly. Just not even just dealing with the fighters that were initially scheduled for the card, but getting fighters like Usman and Masvidal to fight each other, I think, is a misstep, because those guys just haven't been in camp. I know Usman has been staying on his grind as best he can, but what about Masvidal? He's obviously training, but he's not training like he's in camp, And what would have happened if they ended up fighting? For example, Usman loses his title, Masvidal becomes champion, which would be dope, don't get me wrong, but the constant question of what would have happened if they had had a fully dedicated camp and months to prepare? What would have happened then? And really, with that in mind, there's just too much speculation. And I think it's really, at this point, I will keep saying it until it is just burned into everyone's mind. We are 2 weeks out from this thing. We still don't know where it is. And with that in mind, I think that's really telling to what the UFC has got going through their heads right now. They don't know. They don't know where this event's going to take place. What happens if they finally get through with all their meetings, all their discussions, everything they've had to do to even get the fight to take place, the whole card to take place, and it's like a week out or something. It's 3 days out, maybe. That's not enough time to get everybody where they need to be. That's not enough time for Khabib to get his paperwork in, to get the government to let him go work. That's not enough money to, that's not enough time to go through the weight cuts that they need to go through. That's not healthy for those fighters. That's not healthy for those fighters to maybe have to travel from one side of the globe to another, to wherever the location could be or would be or end up being. Because, what happened with Darren Till when he fought Kelvin Gastelum, and he had severe problems getting his visa figured out, and he didn't even have time to really sleep. If they do something like that for UFC 249, and they really, what's the right word I'm looking for, I guess, if they really crunch the time that the fighters have to be able to get to the location in the first place, then in my opinion, that's just asking the fighters to come up less than 100%. And I don't agree with that. And I think that it's wrong of Dana White to keep us in the dark like this. Because keep in mind, he's not just keeping Khabib in the dark. He's keeping everybody in the dark. And for people like Tony Ferguson and Conor McGregor to say these things about Khabib, about how he's scared and how he's hiding in Russia, guys, nobody is hiding because we don't have anything to hide from. We don't know where this thing is. We don't have any clue. We're all in the dark right now. They could decide to have it in Russia, and Tony Ferguson is the one that is quote unquote scared and hiding in, wherever the hell he's living at, So it's just a ridiculous situation. But I do, want to just tell our viewers or everybody out there that it's a possibility that it's just not going to happen at all, and that it will likely be canceled. But if that happens,
It was
probably all for the best, because I think as optimistic as we could be, hoping that this does take place, as much as Uncle Dana, gave us the hope that we needed in this dark time in our lives, the realistic, the reality of the situation is that the smart thing to do is probably not host the event. And it sucks because that puts a lot of people out of work. We've already talked about how the UFC has had to cut a massive amount of people. It's putting a lot of people out of work. A lot of people are going to be out of a paycheck because for the past four events, the UFC just hasn't been happening. They haven't been making money. And it sucks for not just the UFC company itself, but for the fighters that company contracts, like people like Rosenstryker, people like Ngannou, people like Khabib say that they don't care about the money. They're not going to be struggling because they can't fight. But those they're the guys that were on the prelims. Those guys are going to be out of a paycheck. And it just sucks. It sucks for those guys, and I feel for them. But at the end of the day, we got to think about everybody's safety and their security. We got to think about what's right for the individuals rather than the company. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
And then and I think ultimately, if Dana White were to come to grips with that, if you were able to come to grips with that and stop fighting so hard to make this card happen when it ultimately probably shouldn't happen, the fight fan in me says, I want to see it happen. I want what I've been promised months ago. But the human in me is saying the realistic thing to do is postpone it. Have the fights take place later this summer if that is possible. If things start to pan out a little bit better by then, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I think it would give audiences everywhere a sense of clarity, because we would no longer be in the hurricane of, is it going to happen here? Is it going to happen there? We won't be running around like chickens with our heads cut off because we don't know what's going on. Because people freak out when they don't know what's happening. If Dana White came out tomorrow and said UFC 249 is officially not happening, I think everybody would feel a lot better.
Yeah.
Because then we know, and we got it, and the problem is solved. All we have to do is just be patient, wait till the next event happens, whenever it happens. And we won't be freaking out about, is McGregor going to fight Ferguson? Or how is this going to affect, Khabib as champion? And it just won't be a problem. It won't be an issue. But yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents on it.
For sure.
Yeah. Is that, you got anything else to add before we log off here?
No, pretty much covered all of it. Like I said, I just hope they cancel it at this point, just for the safety of everybody involved in the atmosphere of what's happening.
Exactly. Because somebody could get screened and test negative, but then fight on the card, get out of the card, and then test positive, and then it would be a matter of, well, now everybody's in potential risk for having been infected.
Right.
So it's a scary.
Just too many what ifs so far.
Exactly, and I think what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to control the situation as best we can and eliminate those what ifs, instead of constantly perpetuating them and keeping everybody purposefully in the dark, so that nobody thinks that you don't know what you're doing, or people, lose faith in the company, or whatever reason Dana White has for having not told everybody what it is that's really going on. So yeah, that's really all we got to say. I know it's a shorter episode, but you know, we're it's not that we're necessarily stretching what it is that we can talk about. You know, we got 35 minutes of good commentary there on what's been developing, you know, as this thing has been unfolding. But at this point in time, there's really not a lot for us to clarify, go off of, clarify, discuss. There's not a whole lot of breaking news happening here, because honestly, at this point, all of this is speculation and uncertainty. And we'd like to cover like actual news, you know. So
It's a little crazy out there.
Yep. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna get out of here, get out of y'all's hair, let you continue your lonely quarantine. So
hope everybody's being safe out there and wash your damn hands.
Exactly. So we'll see you guys next time.